Hello, this is John
Hi.
Majori with Majori on Bowie, and this is the Majori on Bowie YouTube channel, where I have a new interview every week that always has something to do with David Bowie. And for daily content, visit the blog www.majorionbowie.com, where I have new content every single day that almost always has something to do with David Bowie. And today, I'm very excited to welcome a very special guest, Carl Ewens. Carl is an accomplished author of both fiction and poetry, as well as the book Born to Boogie, the songwriting of Mark Bolan. All Bowie fans are also Mark Bolan fans, or almost all Bowie fans are. And for purposes of our discussion today, Carl wrote the book that I have the cover of, which behind me, which is the On Track volume on every song and every album that Bowie produced between 1964 and 1982. So everything from the very beginning until right before Let's Dance. Carl also produces music under the name Sci-Folk, so there's a lot we could be discussing today, but we're going to really focus on David Bowie. So, Carl, welcome.
Thank you, John. I'm really happy to be here and looking forward to your questions and having a nice chat.
Yeah, so am I. So let me start. I've had the good fortune of having authors on the show before, and I always like to ask the author of a book to describe their book in their own words. So I read it, I really enjoyed it, but how would you describe the book to somebody who hasn't read it?
Well, it's a book that starts at the beginning of Bowie's career before he was famous, and I hope to take readers through how he grew into the artist he was, in particular into his, important Ziggy Stardust phase, the phase for me that got me into Bowie. And so bringing them through that 70s milieu where eventually, he really becomes a global star. And, I know that really didn't happen entirely until the Let's Dance album, but the lead up to that is so important, and it's such a fascinating story.
Yeah. How did you come to write the book?
Well, here's the thing. You mentioned I did write a book previously on Mark Bolan, the Born to Boogie, the songwriting of Mark Bolan book, which obviously I thought, well, why don't I do this on Bowie? I love them both equally, and it did go. The interesting thing is I noticed the Sonic Bond series of books and I was impressed by them. And I thought, wait a minute, they haven't got a Bowie one. And this is really what prompted me to do it, and I have to admit, I wrote the entire Bowie career. I did the entire thing, but the Sonic Bond had already commissioned Don to do the second one. So they only wanted the period up to Scary Monsters kind of thing, that 70s milieu, as I say. And of course, I was happy for them to take that. And that's how it began.
So not to get off track, because we're talking about On Track, but I noticed there is on Amazon, there is a book that has the second half of Bowie's career that's attributed to you. Is that something that's in the works, or did you publish that separately?
I published that separately, and as I say, that's mainly because the Sonic Bond people told me that they'd already commissioned Don to do that book, and he did not want that part. But I didn't want to waste it.
Yeah.
So I kind of rejigged it. I didn't want to use their style,
right?
Because obviously I might get sued or something. So I just put it out on my own through Amazon, and it is there. Yes, if people are interested in my take on it, I'd be really interested to know if Don had a look at it. See how much of it gelled with what he said.
Well, I again, I don't mean to be off track, but I just noticed that recently, and I really enjoyed the book of yours that I read. So I'm going to track that down, and I might give you a call back. So
okay, I don't mind. But this is the book, that really would have been closest to my heart, if you like, because as I say, this was the period where I discovered David Bowie myself.
Yeah. Well, I just my first experience with David Bowie. Of course, I knew who he was before, but I attended a concert in 1987, part of the Glass Spider tour. And, that concert, that tour gets sort of mixed reviews today. but it was so
Yeah,
spectacular and it was so
yeah.
much fun that I went to the concert interested and I came out being a fan.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, I only saw him in Tin Machine and later on, and the very last tour, he did the reality tour, which were both fantastic, of course.
Yes.
But I'm a little bit jealous of you seeing that tour because, of course, he really pulled out all the stops then, didn't he? He went for a very big show, serious stuff.
Absolutely. And that I saw. What I didn't see, and what very few of us saw because it was never captured on film, is the Diamond Dogs tour. Right, that's
Oh,
the other one
yeah.
has the reputation of being a real spectacle.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
so going back to your book that we're talking about today, you
Mm.
cover that period where he's really sort of integrating musicianship with showmanship at a time that nobody else was doing that.
Yes, I think he was really a trailblazer and really began that idea of the big rock show. I mean, possibly you could say Pink Floyd might have been in the same arena, but I think they might have come out a little bit later with the big shows. But for Bowie, the Diamond Dogs thing was like something he had a very strong concept of what he wanted. He wanted to present the originally what would have been George Orwell's 1984 scenario, but in
Yeah.
a rock setting but he had created that the backdrop of Hunger City, as he called it, for the post-apocalyptic sort of mutant heroes to wander around in. And wow, I would have loved to see that. And I think it's almost criminal that there isn't enough footage from that tour, or a complete gig.
Right. Yeah. No, that's like the holy grail. Like
Yeah.
somebody maybe filmed it illicitly, and there's some film sitting somewhere. But no, I don't think that exists.
Yeah.
So let me go back. I want to, I was going to ask. When I was reading the book, I was guessing that you were a fan, which I take it that you are. And
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, is it better to write a book like this as a fan or as a detached observer?
I'd say that you have to be a little bit of both in the sense that, yeah, although I'm not, I am a trained journalist, interestingly. I've done a course on journalism, I've passed a course on journalism, so I do have those skills.
Yeah.
But said that, I think approaching it more from the point of view of the fan is really important. And I think it just helps because you genuinely have that depth of feeling about what you're describing, how you're putting things across. I've read
Right.
other books by very well-known journalists, in one in particular by a guy who refers to himself as a critic, where I find some factual errors in there about Bowie's life, or maybe just his records or whatever. And also, I wouldn't call it a kind of a negativity sometimes about some of his stuff. Like uh, maybe too critical, maybe, you know, I don't know. These people though are very professional and they have the depth of research that you would expect from that sort of writer. But I think
Yeah.
I prefer if someone's one of the things I liked about the Sonic Bond books is I read the one about Bolan that covered the same obviously stuff that I covered, which I loved because I knew the guy was also a fan like me.
Yeah. So
So
that's interesting. So when you start off on a project like this and you're researching it and you're using journalistic skills, do you learn things that you didn't previously know?
oh yes, without a doubt. Wonderful things that really open your mind. And only yesterday, and this seems outrageous really to say that I only found this out yesterday, but I discovered that Mick Ronson was a practicing Mormon, or so it's said in one of the biographies.
I did not know that.
Isn't that it's so weird? You
Yeah.
think Mick Ronson. But yeah, and now I want to get that book by his partner or wife, Susie,
Susie, yeah.
who did Bowie's hair, and I want to find out if that's really true, if he actually was a practicing Muslim, because not Muslim, sorry, I meant Mormon.
Mormon. Yeah. I read
Yeah.
that book. I don't remember her mentioning that. Maybe she did, and I
Well,
elided
this is
over it.
it.
Yeah.
I got that out of one of these books I'm talking about, where it was a critic kind of guy who wrote it, and maybe it was, not necessarily accurate. But to find that out, suddenly reading this book yesterday, I thought, wow, haven't I come across that before somewhere? And I don't think I have.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? What you can find just by I mean, I reckon that when I wrote this book, I'd read something in the order of 50 books about Bowie, biographies mainly.
I was going to ask that. Like, how do you go about researching something like this? Because you cover a wide period of time.
Yeah.
So
it is really twofold. As I say, I have so many Bowie books. I mean,
Yeah.
some of the ones I've got, I'm so amazed. I found, for instance, his early manager from the days of the Laughing Gnome kind of thing. I mean, this is really going into his early period. He was a guy called Pitt, and he wrote a kind of a semi-autobiographical account of his time with David called The Pitt Report. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's a really weird old book,
I've heard of him, but I've never heard of the book.
Yeah, so like I found this book of his in like I was on a holiday at the seaside and I found it in a secondhand shop. I thought, what the heck is the Pitt Report? I don't know. And yeah, it was David Bowie's manager, and he gives quite an interesting. He recounts that time just before Space Oddity, when Bowie was really, really, struggling to make it, and he'd been going most of the '60s trying to have a hit. And yeah, so I think finding books like that really helps with the background to what you're writing. You just have this knowledge already before you start. Being a fan, of course, is the other thing.
Yeah.
Just following Bowie very closely, the things that are on television, online, and of course being able to just Google or do a search to find out different. And you've got to sort of use different sites, not just one. You've got to find a balanced opinion and use your own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned this period before Space Oddity, where I think many casual fans might not realize that David Bowie was a professional musician for years in the '60s, and your book devotes a considerable amount of space to this period. So I have to admit something, that this is not my favorite period. So my question for you is, do you feel like this period in his creative development is more interesting from a historic perspective, or do you sometimes like putting on the Deerham record, or like Take My Tip or Liza Jane or something, and just listen to it like you would anything else?
Well, yes, I think I was astonished by how good those early singles were, particularly the A sides. Some of the B sides maybe less so, but if you look at Can't Help Thinking About Me,
Yeah.
which he did resurrect towards the end of his career, and I think there's a video called Storytellers.
Yeah.
And Bowie talks about how he met Mark Bolan at the time he was writing that track, and they were both painting his manager's office. I don't know if you've heard that story.
I have, yes.
Yeah.
But well, tell it. I've heard it. The people
Yeah.
watching this might
Well,
not.
it was made eventually into a sort of semi-comedic television, streaming service thing called Urban Myths. And there's several of these shows called Urban Myths about different rock stars usually. There's one about Dylan, one about backstage at Live Aid, which I think might have a little Bowie in it. But this one about, I can't remember the title of it, but there was one about Bowie and Bolan, both in their early manager's office before they were famous, being asked by him to paint the walls to help pay for whatever he pays for in the studio, do a little work. And it's funny, but it sort of shows that they were both in the same boat. They both want to be famous. They both wanted to be the next big thing, and they vie with each other, criticizing each other's shoes and clothes and things like that.
Yeah.
It's really quite funny. But yeah, I mean, these early tracks, they were going for it. They were both in the '60s trying to make a success, and they both failed. They took them till about 69, 70 to really break through.
Yeah. And so I'm going to do this a little out of order, because I was going to ask you about Mark Bolan, but I'll ask you about him now. So Mark Bolan really did break through around that time, and even some of Bowie's albums that we know today were not successful when they were initially released, like a Space Oddity, would we call Space Oddity today, or The Man Who Sold the World, or even Hunky Dory. But then Mark Bolan's career and David Bowie's career sort of diverged in the middle 70s. And today, David Bowie is much better known than Mark Bolan. What do you think happened? Of course, Mark Bolan died prematurely, but they had already started going down different paths before that.
Yeah, I think it's important to stress that they were friends right to the end of Bolan's life. David appeared on Mark's show, TV. It's a children's show, really, but he had a lot of, he championed the punk rock thing going on in England in 76, 77. Had the Jam on there and a couple of other, he toured with the Damned. So he was quite relevant. And Bowie knew that Bolan was still an important, I think he really loved him. I think they just had some kind of natural bond from the 60s, probably struggling together to make it. And also, Mark Bolan is just as unique as David Bowie. And I think they both saw something in each other that they wished they had. And in a way, I think Bowie looked on Bolan as a little bit like Iggy Pop. Iggy and Bolan both had some kind of magic quality about them. They had some kind of ability to lose themselves in what they were doing. Whereas Bowie, I think, was more analytical, definitely more cerebral about his intellectual, if you like, than the other two. But he kind of admired that naturalness they had about what they did.
Yeah. So, to that point about Bowie being intellectual, I think, my next question that might be part of the answer. But so you wrote 2 books about David Bowie.
Yeah.
I write a blog every day. I write about David Bowie every day. And, there's some other new book is coming out every month. And
exactly.
Right. What's the secret? What's the appeal? Why does he give us endless fascination? He hasn't even been with us for nearly a decade. And what is it about David Bowie that is so compelling even today?
Well, I'd say that was to do with his own fascinations. I think he said himself that he had obsessions, things that drove him to communicate in the way he did, write songs in the way he did. And that's what really is underneath it all, what we kind of seek from these great artists. We seek some kind of special ability they have to connect with us, to bring out things we might not be aware of. In Bowie's case, you have to be aware, I guess, that he himself was interested in a lot of very arcane subjects, sometimes spiritual ideas. He nearly became a Buddhist at the time of Space Oddity. I think he was really tempted because he wasn't having as much success as he thought he should have had. And I think he was. There's a story Tony Visconti tells about him going to see the Buddhist monk about becoming a proper novitiate or whatever. And the guy said, "And what else have you got in mind?" And Bowie said, "I've got all these ideas for songs still." He said, "Go and do the songs." So we were lucky there that the Buddhist guy didn't, guide him to become a monk. But but underneath it all, he had all kinds of strange obsessions and weird, obsessions about hidden, underneath it all. I guess it's this thing about he was always into UFOs and the Curlian photography thing that he liked that was on the outside, not the outside, on the Earthling album. The cover has pictures of an aura around the human body, and that's called Curlian photography. And that's one of these kind of strange subjects that he had a fascination with, along with aliens, as you know. And, he was just really bringing things out that I think in most people would find fascinating, and they are fascinating.
Yeah, right. They still are. I was thinking as you're saying this that a lot of what he put into his songs in terms of his lyrics are open to interpretation, and whatever was going on in his head is not always clear. And I'm wondering, when you're writing about cryptic lyrics that are open to interpretation, but you also know that the person who wrote them is very literate, is very intellectual. Is that liberating or is that restraining? Do you feel like you have license to go beyond the words themselves, or do you feel like you have to do extra research to try to figure out what is he trying to say?
Yeah, I think that the extra research is definitely in order. You do, as I say, need to look at different sources
Yeah,
for possible reasons why he may have written in a certain way. I mean, it's famous and is in a very famous documentary that he used the cut-up technique of, of Burroughs. He obviously had a lot of interest in other arts and other art forms, not just music, but literature and film and poetry. The song Man Who Solved the World is
yeah,
based on a poem, a very famous poem. It was something that he soaked up and brought something else out of it. But some of his songs were very straightforward. I mean, if you see how Starman is used often in science fiction films, Space
yeah,
Oddity the same, Life on Mars, there's definitely, for me personally, that science fiction element, that his love of UFOs. He was in a UFO society. Apparently, even as late as the Young Americans period, there's a famous article about a guy who meets him at a party, and he's still going on about how UFOs are going to appear and land, and they're going to, the world is going to be a different place. I think that drove him a lot in his early career, this idea of contact with aliens. I think I mentioned it in the beginning of the book as a kind of,
yes.
there's a couple of quotes from him about he senses, he says he senses other presences in the universe. This kind of stuff just is fascinating, isn't it? And
It, it,
leads
it's
into
it is fascinating, and it's you think about uh, somebody who has those interests and how do they channel them, right? So here you had somebody who channeled these sort of esoteric interests in a very creative way that left us with these gifts.
Yeah, and like you said, why is he still so relevant and so adored by the public? I think because of these interests he had, these obsessions,
Yeah,
they give his art a greater resonance with people. There's some kind of extra depth to what he's doing. Because a lot of pop stars, like say Bolan, capable of making the most wonderful sounds and they sing beautifully and the lyrics are clever and probably as complex and strange as you say, that you can't really clearly interpret them. But with Bowie, I think there's much more to it. I think he is making very clear statements, although couched in clever poetry. One of there's two songs in the book that I was most interested in analyzing. Is it okay if I just go ahead and say why that is?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I actually I have a couple particular songs I'm going to ask you
Oh,
about a little
right.
bit later. Yeah,
Yeah, cool. Well, maybe one of them will be the same as yours. I don't know, but the two the first one that drove me to write the book as much as anything was Bewlay Brothers.
yes,
Bewlay Brothers is a very brilliant, very verbose, poetic song.
yeah,
And he himself said of it that not only that it was at least to some extent about his half brother Terry,
yeah,
who was had a very strange and troubled life, and also that he called it, a word he used was palimpsest, which I looked up, obviously, the word palimpsest, but apparently it has to do with medieval manuscripts that because the monks may not have had enough paper, they would erase old writings and use the page again.
yeah,
And that's a palimpsest. It's something written on top of something else.
yeah,
And I took that in and I thought about it. And I thought these lyrics are so similar to Mark Bolan's Tyrannosaurus Rex lyrics of the same period. We're talking here about around 1969 and 70. And he may have been talking about him and Bolan and their complex
yeah,
wordplay and their use of language, and as well as about his brother, whom he intimated it was mostly about. That was the first one. I really want to get across how similar those lyrics were to Mark Bolan's early Tyrannosaurus Rex lyrics, which were a lot more complex and strange than his pop song lyrics. And then secondly, the other song, which really I found out a lot about whilst writing about it, was Teenage Wildlife, from Scary Monsters. Now, a lot of people have said that that song is mainly about his relationship with the then current synth pop people, the people that were referred to in England as new romantics. Um, and fair enough, yes, I'm sure that's part of the one level of looking at it, that the teenage wildlife is him being kind of chased around by these people who adored him. And I'm not a piece of teenage wildlife. I'm a serious artist, But there's another level to it where he wrote something at the time of that album, and he really had concerns about war and about the waste of human life in war, particularly of young people. And that was an element of the song that had not occurred to me until I started looking at what he'd written about it himself
Yeah.
and what's being said in it. And partially, I think he's saying that young people are treated almost like wildlife being sent out into these battles that they might not, like in Vietnam, they might not even know what they're really fighting for. They're just told, go out there. And yeah, I think he sounds a bit desperate in that song. And I think part of it is that he's just sick of seeing war over and over in the world, as we all are, of course.
Well, you mentioned Teenage Wildlife, and I'm holding up my copy of your book. It might turn invisible. You can't see.
It's a little invisible.
Yeah. But I underlined the first sentence in your write-up of that because this is why I think the book is a treasure trove. You have the first sentence is, this is possibly the central masterpiece of Bowie's career, Teenage Wildlife. And I have never read anybody with that level of appreciation for that song and recognizing it as being so central. And it really, it's on, Scary Monsters is my favorite album. And I listen to it, I've been listening to it, at least once a week for 40 years.
Never tire of it.
Yeah. And it's one of two of his albums that I can never get tired of. The other one being Diamond Dogs. And I like almost everything that he did, but those two in particular. But so why am I saying this? Because even after listening to this song and this album over and over and over again, I get to your description of that song, and it really made me pause and sort of reconsider, because I always thought of it, Teenage Wildlife, as, I fixate on the line, same old thing and brand new drag comes sweeping into view, right? And that what you said is the typical interpretation, is that it's Bowie's relationship with the New Romantics, and that but what you are talking about in terms of the relationship between younger people and war, if you think about it, the one constant social commentary that Bowie had throughout his entire career was about war. He was against war in the 60s. He was against war, in the next day. There's like 3 or 4 anti-war songs in the next day. And I never interpreted that song through that lens. So
I absolutely agree. I hadn't myself, really, to be honest, until I started examining it closely. And I came across particularly that line, the midwives of history, they put on their bloody robes.
Yeah.
What the heck is that really about? New Romantics? I don't think so. I think there's another level to it, and he's really saying, stop sending kids out to fight your miserable wars, and get a but it's really fascinating, isn't it, that there are levels, more levels to the songs, like poetry, really. And you have to get into the depths of them to really grasp them fully, and then there's the music.
Right. Yeah. I'm not a musician, and I don't know music theory, and I know you produce music, but I don't have that appreciation. So I tend to focus in on the lyrics, which I think this book that you wrote does as well. It focuses less on music theory, or would you say that I was reading it the wrong way?
No, you're absolutely right. And there's a good reason for that. And the reason is that I don't read music. So although I know certain chord structures and, types of the keys or what the various, I'm used to analyzing music too, but I didn't think it was really important to do that too much, because when I read those highly critical analyses by people who may be practicing journalists or editors or something like that, they can get a bit dry. If you start, and this is the cadence that leads to the
Yeah.
chords,
Yes.
I occasionally mention a chord sequence, or I'll say this part of the melody moves beautifully here, but it's not like I want to get into because if you're not a musician, you're just going to find that boring.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're talking about Teenage Wildlife, which
Yeah.
is, I'm going to say, not one of Bowie's better known songs to the casual observer. I'm going to ask you about two that are, but before I do that, I wanted to set up this dichotomy. Is it easier, or do you feel more flexibility in writing about a less well-known song or a song that's been analyzed over and over and over again?
I'm glad you asked that, really, because one of the things that I find interesting, I was talking to my daughter Kira earlier about a Mick Jagger interview where they ask him, how do you like the way your music is perceived, through the press, through the fans, whatever. And he says, well, the thing is that half of it is just mythology. He says half of it's been made up by some clever commentator at some point, and all the other people have picked up on the thing that's been made up and made it into this myth. It's not real. It's nothing to do with the music that we actually made. And that's the trouble when you're looking at very well-known ones. There's a lot of commentary on that song, and then people will have very possibly fixed ideas about what it might mean, and it is more difficult then to use your own critical faculties the same.
Well, along those lines, one of the songs I wanted to ask you about is Heroes, where I was struck by a quote that you had that came from Bowie, where he says, I don't even know what the song means anymore. And he said that in an appreciative way, but it's, I don't want to say always, but I'm going to say always anyway. It's always struck me that that song is sort of like the David Bowie version of the Bruce Springsteen song Born in the USA, where people think the Bruce Springsteen song is this jingoistic patriotic song, and it's really not at all. And I don't hear the literal words of Heroes or the sound of his voice in the studio recording or the video where he looks like he's tortured. I don't think of what he actually put out as a heroic song. And it is subsequently, including by Bowie, been used to celebrate every type of hero you could imagine, like it's celebratory that way. And so when you come to that song, how did you approach it? Because I think, well, I don't want to tell you how I read your writing, so why don't you tell us?
Okay. Well, what was immediately obvious about it is that some of the initial inspiration for it came from him seeing from the studio, apparently, Tony Visconti having a kind of secret assignation with some girl by the wall, by the big Berlin Wall there, which still existed at the time he recorded that. And I thought, maybe this song is really meant to be, on one level, about ordinary people being heroes, in the sense that they follow their heart, they do what they desire, and we can be. Obviously, the main line there is just for one day.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to see it like that. Really, it's not a big, like you say, like Springsteen's Born in the USA interpreted as jingoistic. It's rubbish. The song is saying something critical, and in the case of Heroes, it's Bowie saying something very gentle, I think, about the ordinary nature of people, that they will do heroic things, they will follow their hearts, they'll be able to make some kind of change to their own lives or to life in general. And that's what it's really about. It's a kind of grassrootsy kind of thing, not a big, but it's, it can be used. It has been used, as you say, in many big ceremonies.
So the other like very well-known song I wanted to ask you about was Life on Mars. And the reason I wanted to ask you about that is, as I'm going through your book, on occasion, I found an interpretation that you put forward that I didn't entirely agree with myself. And I thought that this was an example, and maybe you're going to tell me that I misinterpreted what you wrote, but I took from the way you wrote it that the girl with the mousy hair was thinking that even life on a different planet would be better than this life. And I always sort of took it that the life on Mars was a question that might be the subject of one of the movies that she's seen, and that she's really just sort of escaping the drudgery of day-to-day life by going to movies where she might see cavemen fighting, or the lawman beating up the wrong guy, or is their life on
Yeah.
Mars, right? The song isn't really about contemplating whether or not there's life on Mars. So the reason I wanted to ask about that is not to argue with you, but it's, here is one of his most frequently covered songs, is one of his most beloved songs. He recognizes it as, one of his greatest achievements as a musician, yet there's still different subtle ways to interpret it.
Yeah. Well, as you said already, there are certain kinds of lyrics that Bowie wrote that are very in some ways kind of fragmented or surreal. They don't always have literal sense to them. Mickey Mouse has grown up a cow,
Yeah.
etc. My brother, my dog, and clowns. It's all very odd. But
Yeah.
my central idea there was that Bowie, like in Teenage Wildlife, is so disgusted with the way people cavort around on Earth doing really stupid things. The lawman beats up the wrong guy. Cavemen dragging by, like he's almost seeing the worst of humanity, and that's his. It's just like a bit satirical. He's saying, "Is the life on Mars? The life here is not particularly great."
Yeah.
Or from what you see, what we choose to focus on in movies, in TV series, there's so much. I mean, everything you see coming up on TV, new, really dark drama. This is the darkest, the new, and I often think and then conversely, of course, I started the book off, I think, saying how he loved horror movies. He was into all that, so he couldn't help himself really, but make sort of horror-ish, or he had a definite bent towards dark stuff, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. Even some of his happier sounding songs often have dark lyrics.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, as you're writing and researching every single song that he did you ever change your mind or change your appreciation for a song just because you researched it?
I think I already had my favorites, as you probably do, from the whole canon of his songwriting career. And as I mentioned, when I was researching Teenage Wildlife, I certainly found other levels in it that I didn't realize were there by just a general appreciation of it. It's hard to think of anything that really changed a lot. I think when I studied the songs in depth, I found just more of what backed up what I was feeling already. I mean, when I was looking at the Outside album, was really fascinating. I mean, I know that's not in this particular book, but this idea that he wanted to, it was almost like another Diamond Dogs. He wanted to create another post-apocalyptic scenario, another really dark,
Yeah.
drama almost. And I think I refer to it in my book about that album as almost like a radio play, or like it could be made so easily into a film, I think.
Oh, yeah. That I think of uh Outside, Diamond Dogs, and to a lesser extent Ziggy Stardust as, yeah, you could turn them into a movie or play. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those things should be done, really. I
Yeah.
mean, one thing I often think about is, because we were talking about the Diamond Dogs era stuff with the Hunger City, all of that stuff, he made sketches. He even
Yeah.
did little short films showing how he wanted things to be.
Yeah.
Surely somebody at some point is going to actually stage that thing and put the songs in it and make it into a fantastic dark sci-fi musical.
Well, that leads me to another question, which I was going to ask later, but I'll ask it now. So, do you think we'll still be listening to David Bowie in another 50 years or in 100 years? I mean, we won't, because we won't be around, but
I'm almost certain that will be the case.
yeah.
And I think that's really because what happened in the 60s with Dylan and the Beatles, and the sudden where pop music became literate, basically. That's why, I mean, even to an extent, Elvis, who inspired, the early rock and rollers inspired Bowie, they inspired Lennon, they inspired Dylan. It's interesting, both David Bowie and Bob Dylan mentioned specifically Little Richard as their
Yeah.
initial inspiration, you know.
Yeah.
And it's still, let's face it, how long is it since that? Like 1955 or something? It's a long time already, isn't it? It's nearly a
70
come on,
years.
70 years, yeah. So, in 50 years, 100 years, it's
Yeah.
going to be the same. And it's that, that thing, that cultural thing where they like were doing something new that had never been heard before. And the same with Dylan and Bowie, especially. I think, he wrote that song for Bob Dylan because he was picking up the mantle of spokesman for a generation,
Yeah.
quite, literally. And he was speaking for the youth of the time, and it'll always be seen like that. In history, they'll look back and say, yeah, these artists were important culturally. They had something to say, and they helped to there are people to understand the times they lived in.
Yeah. It will be interesting when the copyrights run out, what people will do with the music if they don't have to worry about that.
Well,
yeah.
Sorry, go on. I was going to say, if record companies still exist, they have ways of getting around that, because with some of Dylan's stuff, early stuff, it's already come to that point. And what they did is they packaged absolutely everything they had and only released it very, very limited, like 10 copies. But they were on sale, those 10 copies. So someone somewhere got all of Dylan's recorded stuff from 1960 or 61,
Yeah.
And so, of course, this is what will happen with all of the other stuff.
Yeah.
They'll find a way to, if they still exist, if society doesn't change so remarkably, as David might have said, you just don't know what's coming with like the internet, with AI.
Right.
The future is very, very strange looking.
Yeah. So the period that you covered in this book, you've said that you wrote about his entire career, but this particular book covers the period that ends in 1982. And you wrote that many fans consider this, you play off the name of the song, consider this to be Bowie's golden years. And
Yeah.
you sort of hinted at the answer to this question already, but do you think that?
Whoa, well, I know that you got into Bowie through Let's Dance. And I know that Let's Dance has its critics. Some people think he sold out there. I don't know if you're aware of that movie, Velvet Goldmine.
Yes.
Yeah, where it's literally almost making that point, that he's somehow sold out when he did Let's Dance because he became so commercial. But not to me. I loved it. I was as in love with it as you were, But
yes.
I'd say that this period was the most important period, maybe because I lived through it, just like you living through the Let's Dance and onwards. I think when it impresses on you as you're living through it. I was 13 when I first heard Bowie, and it was Life on Mars, and and that music. I think I have to say that I'm a big glam rock music fan.
Yeah.
And I feel sometimes a little bit aggrieved that a lot of what we hear from the 70s is disco music.
Yes.
Disco music. Of course, Bowie got into disco music and made his own versions of it. But essentially, he was in the glam rock era. He was in there with T-Rex, the Slade, the Sweet, the Glitter Band, and Roxy, Even Lou Reed was taken in, Mott the Hoople, of course, all of these bands that he had a connection with. That was my era. And that's probably why I say it's the golden era of Bowie, because it's my golden era. And I love all of it, though. I love all of it.
Yeah. So you love all of it. Okay, I was going to ask you that too, which is, do you come to a particular album or song and I don't have anything to say about this?
No, the only album that I think in Bowie's whole career that was perhaps a little bit under par was Tonight. And I bought it when it came out. I bought all the singles. I love it. I've got a signed copy of it that was really cheap because you can hardly see the signature. It's under all that thing on the cover, but I love it. And even though the only reason I think it's a little under par for him is there's so few of his own songs on it, there are a lot of covers, a lot of Iggy songs, But having said that, I think that Blue Jean is one of my favorite singles of his entire. And of course, Loving the Alien is like the top of everybody's charts of Bowie in many ways, if you're a big fan.
Think about Blue Jean. You know, I wasn't going to ask about that song, but think about the movie that the Jazzin' for Blue Jean, you know, 20-minute short film that he released, and how just it's like, if you don't know that exists and you like David Bowie and you find it, it's like uncovering I don't know, like a secret treasure.
It's so exciting, isn't it, when you
Yeah.
find that long form videos, not just like a song video, but the thing has a story, you know, he plays a character in it, you know, and I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I think it's quite funny in a way that people may not see him as an actor in some ways because he wasn't massively successful as an actor, but he was an actor, you know.
Yes.
He studied mime. He had that string to his bow. He always was able to do it. And I was watching a documentary about the director of you know, the man who fell to earth, the Nicholas Roeg guy. He was some talking head in that says, well, he wasn't really an actor, of course. He was just told to deliver the lines in this way, but he was, you know, that they get that wrong. He'd acted in short films, a commercial. He'd done the mime thing. Really, he considered himself an actor. I think he called himself the actor on some album covers, you know, Hunky Dory.
Yeah. Well, he was for sure. And you think about some of the other movies he did, like Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, where he's definitely acting, right? And also, I think David Bowie didn't just get up on stage and sit on a stool and take out his guitar and play and sing. He was acting even while he was giving concerts.
Yeah, absolutely true. And you could see how his background in studying mime helped him to put himself across. He had such confidence, didn't he, when he performed the show where he finishes off the Ziggy character. Yeah, you know, the Hammersmith audience show where this is the last gig we'll ever do.
Yes.
You know, he was a master of big statements and just the ability to hold the audience in the palm of his hand. The costume changes, the general the way he moved. You know, I don't know if you know, but Adrian Belew, one of his sidemen, wrote a song about him because he thought his stage movements were so wonderful he had to capture it, and it's called Animal Grace.
And, I did not know that song existed.
Yeah, I think that's on probably he's probably on his first album, Lone Rhino, I think, or the second one. But it's really, you know, it paints a good picture of Bowie. You know, the way he moves and the rhythms in it are similar to Bowie's. I think everybody who saw Bowie perform, not, you know, disagree that he had a real magnetism about his movement, and it wasn't just the songs, obviously.
I just wrote that down because I did not know about that song, and I'm going to find it.
Yeah.
So I'm just you've been great with your time, and I feel like I could talk to you all day. And I might ask you back, Carl, if that's okay. But
absolutely, man, anytime, yeah.
So let me wrap up with the question I ask everybody, which is, what is your favorite Bowie song and album?
Right. Well, I'd have to say from this book, the song would be Teenage Wildlife, and for the reasons not only of the complexity and depth of the lyric, but the music. I don't know a better sounding song. It's so wonderfully put together by Visconti and Bowie. I mean, Roy Bittan on piano from the E Street Band for starters, and of course, do I not rhapsodize about Fripp's guitar playing on that?
Yeah,
Fripp is a god, you know. I don't know how he does what he does. I'd put him in the league of Hendrix straight away.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, that would be my choice. And the album would either just be the same as you, either the Scary Monsters or Diamond Dogs.
Yeah.
You know, because Diamond Dogs is that evocation of this wonderful alternate world, you know, which we can enter into. Don't you always feel like you're in some other like reality when you're listening to that album? It's so immersive, you know.
Yeah, right from the opening howl.
Yeah. The dogs. He
Yeah.
does the dog. I'm sure that's his voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Carl Ewens, thank you very much. This has been wonderful. I really enjoyed having this conversation. And like I said,
Me too.
unless you think this was awful, I'm going to invite you to come back.
You know, I would love to, and yeah, I will look forward to that. Okay, thank you, John, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Yeah, you too.